everyone, and welcome to week 6 of my videos of studying my master's in psychology. This week I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship in reference to what we've learned. So I'm going to start off with cognitive psychology. So this week we've kind of been expanding in our knowledge of our long-term memory, and we've been diving into explicit memory, which is essentially information that we retrieve based on kind of like our conscious awareness or personal experiences. So two types of explicit memories is episodic memory and semantic memory. Episodic memory is linked to events. So this could be, what you did for your 21st birthday. And semantic memory is linked to general knowledge, which could be what is the capital of France? Paris, of course. So semantic memory also falls into, theories of categorization. So we're going to look at 3 types of theories of categorization that we learned this week in reference to entrepreneurship. So one of them is common features. So common features, the easiest way to explain it's what we recall when we think of a particular stimuli. So it could be that birds have feathers, and in entrepreneurship there could be some characteristics. So maybe that's risk tolerance, maybe that's the ability to come up with ideas, or maybe that's the ability to kind of like be really driven and executional. That could be common features that we share. Secondary to that, there are also probabilistic categories as well, which essentially are based around the probabilities of the features being in common. So 2 of those types are the prototype model. So the prototype model is where there's basically a benchmark that exists for what those features or what good looks like. So when we think about entrepreneurship, this could be Steve Jobs or it could be Jeff Bezos. And essentially what we're saying here is that, if you're a successful entrepreneur, then you are Steve Jobs, or, this are the characteristics that can lead you to be, and so on. And that's kind of like, the prototype, what we look up to or what we assume is a very, very successful entrepreneur. And in all honesty, Steve Jobs is a really successful entrepreneur. So then we also have the exemplar model. So the exemplar model are then kind of like secondary to that. So what we're saying here is that these individuals also have characteristics within their own right that can fit into or that can contribute to the prototype. So a really good example to look at that could be like YC founders, and we could look at the founder of like Airbnb. And what we're saying here is that, okay, so YC founders are, they share these characteristics, which means that they have the potential to build really big life-changing businesses. So they're not Steve Jobs, but actually they fall within that branch where they're like an exemplar features or exemplar model, where they could be just as successful. And then this can then create a typicality effect, which then we have this assumption that, okay, YC founders are good or they're great because they share these characteristics, they've had this success, they've made these changes, so ultimately, they are like, they have the potential to be really great founders. So this was looking at kind of like, how our memory can associate different characteristics to entrepreneurship and success. The problem with this, we're going to take a look at historical psychology, where this week we learned about scientific racism, and essentially it can create bias where we can then make assumptions around what success looks like. And in historical psychology, we learn about Eugenics by Francis Galton, and the assumption that actually that people's physical appearance or personalities meant that they had greater mental capacity or intelligence than other people. And obviously we now know that this whole thinking and this whole ideology and theory was wrong. But at the time, one of the ways that it was actually validated was through research that was done amongst students that were learning in, black and white students that were learning in the South and in the East of America. What it had found that in the South, the black students weren't scoring as good in comparison to the white students, but when they placed those black students in the East Coast, or the black students that were studying in the East Coast were studying just as well, if not better, than the white students. So essentially it meant that the environment that the children were learning in had an impact on their mental capacity and how successful they were in their final exams. So to kind of tie this back into entrepreneurship, essentially what we're trying to say is that sometimes, you know, we can have these benchmarks and have these prototypes, but actually environment also plays a big part. So if you're not a YC founder, or if you are just a founder like me, you know, the advantage that you can have is obviously being able to learn and place yourself in circumstances that can improve your probability of being a successful entrepreneur. And this was further validated in biological psychology, where this week we learn about neuroplasticity and how our brain is formed and how it changes over time. And obviously neuroplasticity has been proven to shown that you know, our cognitive abilities can increase through learning new things, exercise, diet, hydration, so consistently kind of like doing things that increases our brain's capacity and the density of it as well to continue functioning in a really good way, which means that you could be 70 years old and still have the same brain structure or brain functionalities as somebody who is 24 years old. So that's really positive, and it's also really relevant in terms of entrepreneurship, because essentially what it's saying is that we could always learn, we can always improve, and we can always increase our probabilities of actually achieving our goals and reaching success. So yeah, so that was kind of a wrap up of what we learned this week and how it aligns with entrepreneurship. So in cognitive, we were diving deep into long-term memory, the kind of branches of long-term memory, which are explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory is really linked to how we retrieve information and personal experiences, and within that we have episodic memory and we have semantic memory, and then within semantic memory there are theories of categorization, and some of that include common features, prototype model, exemplar model, and typicality effect. In historical psychology we learnt about, you know, the dangers of scientific racism and how research has been able to eliminate a lot of pre-existing theories about intelligence and kind of like, you know, what defines intelligence. And in biological psychology we've been able to learn about our brain and how it's consistently growing, and you know, if you're not doing anything, it's like a wear or tear, so you definitely want to be doing something good with it, or you want to be exercising its muscles and consistently keeping it active. And I think these are all really, really important ideologies and thinking when it comes to entrepreneurship, because yes, there are benchmark founders that we look up to and we're like, yes, I want to be that founder. There are also examples of loads of great successful entrepreneurs around us that we can look at and be like, they're just as good, and I also have the potential to be influenced by them. But then we also have to bear in mind that environment plays a really big part, where people coming from, what they're learning, what they're being exposed to, can definitely accelerate their entrepreneurship journey in comparison to those who don't have the same. So the end goal really is to find ways to increase your cognitive abilities so that you can increase your probabilities of success. Great. All right, everyone, I hope that was really useful. Of course, please do your own research on all of these psychology concepts and theories so that you can have a better understanding, not based on my own interpretations. And also subscribe to my channel so that you can hear what I'm learning about this week and that I can share with you next week. Thank you. Bye.